Another Alkebulan Awakening series in collaboration with Kumbukeni. Guys, it's been a while. I think we're taking about a month off, but it's nice to be back. It's nice to greet everybody. My name, as always, as you can see on the screen, is Oladele Dosumu. I'm the co-founder of the Emerging Alkebulan. And on this platform, you know what we do. We're here to awaken your consciousness and what's the other word? I can't remember now.
Disrupt.
Yeah, basically disrupt your thought process. Yeah, that's another one, guys. Unduku.
Yeah, thank you, Oladele. The name is Nduku. I'm the host on Kumbukeni, and as you know, we collaborate with my brother because I'm all about communal building. I'm excited about today's conversation. I'm looking forward to it. It's time for you all to learn about Marcus Garvey.
Yeah, I could say, as you can all see there, I'm gonna let my brother ShakaRa introduce himself. Okay, we're gonna talk about who is Marcus Garvey and what is Garveyism. A lot of our African brothers and sisters haven't got a clue about where Pan-Africanism started. And you know what we do on this place? We educate. We need to understand the story, the mystery behind the history. So my brother ShakaRa, if you want to introduce yourself and just take us straight into the presentation, bro. We're looking forward to this.
First of all, let me greet yourselves and everybody. 10-9-1 in the Shona language of Zimbabwe, which simply means be thankful unto the mother, father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai Modzimo Mokolo, we give praises unto our great ancestors because our ancestors are worthy to be praised. And in the Tree language, spoken mostly in Ghana, we recite the affirmation Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African liberation and African power for all African people. It's an honor and a pleasure to be featuring on the Emerging Alkebulan and Kumbukeni because I am an avid follower and viewer of you all, and I've been appreciating your work, and I want you all to know that there are Africans who I know in our global African community who are watching you all. Sometimes I get somebody sending me a video like, do you know about these lot? And I'm like, yeah, I know about these lot. You know what I'm saying? So so I want you to know that your work is reaching our people worldwide. My name is Tafadzwa ShakaRa Bandaka, often just referred to as ShakaRa, which is one of my middle names. And I'm a born and raised member of the Alkebulan Revivalist movement, a Pan-African organization of which my father is a founding member. And so we are a liberation organization that is Pan-African, Black nationalist Pan-African in its inclination, and built upon a spiritual cultural foundation. And so it is our aim really to put the politics in the spirituality and the spirituality in the politics. I am also, as a result of that, a born and raised Garveyite, which gives me the qualification to speak on our subject today. And as such, I'm a member of two other organizations, which are the UNIA ACL, more specifically the UNIA ACL RC 2020, which is the organization of the most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and also the Black Star Action Network International. Shout out to our leadership over there in Sierra Leone. That's Chief Fode and Sister Kenya Malinke Mansare. We appreciate you all. And yeah, outside of that, I'm also the founder and director of a media institution called Kimbunga Media. If you are not subscribed to Kimbunga Media, subscribe to Kimbunga Media. You know, I have had the pleasure of Sister Nduku joining us a couple of times. And know that we're going to get you all on the platform in an official capacity in a not too distant future. But it's just an honor and a pleasure to be here. I don't take it for granted. I appreciate the work that you all are doing, as I said already. And when you're ready, I'll go straight into the presentation.
That feeling is mutual, absolutely mutual. We are one.
Yeah, respect, my brother. Yes. All right, let's go.
Okay, all right. So let me get into this. Bring it up when you're ready. So we're going to get into Garvey and Garveyism, and we're going to begin with an explanation of the man himself. Yeah, for those who are not, knowledgeable about the life of Papa Garvey, as we refer to him, and in the Alkebulan Revivalist movement, we consider Marcus Garvey in the realm of prophetic, that he was a supreme visionary in the realms of African liberation and inspired our people around the world with the vision of African liberation. So he is referred to as a prophet. We're going to get into a bit about his life so you can understand a bit about the man himself, and then we're going to talk about Garveyism as a political economic philosophy and what that entails. Yeah. And there's much that I won't get into in the presentation, but hopefully in the discussion we'll be able to get into even more. Okay. And I'm doing it that way because I want to be guided by the discussion itself and not too prescriptive, but there are ways and means in which we can engage in deeper discussion as and where possible and necessary. And so let's begin with the basics. Papa Garvey was born on the island, the beautiful island of Jamaica, an island from which my family also hails, at least on one side of my family. I'm born in the parish of St. Anne's, Jamaica. His parents are Mama Sarah Jane Garvey and Papa Marcus Garvey Sr. At age 14, Papa Garvey became an apprentice for his godfather, Mr. Alfred Burroughs' printing firm. And that's very important because it's important for us to recognize that Papa Garvey was a printer by trade. He this particular trade quite young in age, and it was quite significant at this particular moment in time because of the fact that the printing word was in fact the primary media form of the age. Yes. And so he was effectively engaged in a very, very cutting edge industry and a very important industry for the context in which he lived. As it says, at age 16, he moved to Kingston, which is the capital city of Jamaica, and earned employment at the P.A. Benjamin Printery. He became a foreman within 2 years. Yeah, so a foreman is that middle management in that regard, and it was very, very what's the word? Rare in colonial Jamaican society that a man so young, not only a man so young, but a black man so young, not only a black man so young, but a black man of such dark complexion would become such a leader in an institution or a corporation in colonial Jamaica. And I say that because to understand colonial Jamaica is to understand that colonial Jamaica was stratified according to classes, which were depicted according to the shade of your skin. And so white being the very pinnacle, the top, the elite within the nation, and then everything in proximity to whiteness was literally graded in terms of how light it was in comparison to whiteness at the top and blackness at the very bottom, brothers and sisters. And so this was unusual for a man of Papa Garvey's complexion to earn such a position, but it speaks to the mastery that he commanded over the trade at that time. But not satisfied, brothers and sisters, with his own ascendancy up the ladder, Papa Garvey began to study the conditions of the masses of Jamaican people in colonial Jamaica. And so his activism really begins during this period, whereby in response to low pay, as it says, and poor working conditions, Marcus Garvey led a strike on behalf of the workers. And he led this strike in spite of the fact that his bosses at the P.A. Benjamin Printery were willing to grant him privileges and extra considerations if he was prepared, yes, to betray the interests of the workers at that printery. But the workers asked him to lead the strike on their behalf, and he did so. As a result, he lost his job. Yeah, but it's important for us to note where this man began his activism, and he began his activism as a labor leader, not only in the island of Jamaica, as we shall see very soon. Moving on, as we see here, he became connected with noted Pan-Africanist Dr. Robert Love. Just note that name. We're not going to go into who he is, but just note the name Dr. Robert Love, because he was an early black nationalist, early Pan-Africanist in Jamaica, who Papa Garvey said is responsible for giving him a lot of his early quote-unquote race consciousness. And he was one of the leaders in the institution called the National Club, which was basically an organization that was challenging British colonialism on the island of Jamaica. Papa Garvey became an assistant secretary for the National Club. So his anti-colonial activism, in fact, began in Jamaica. Okay, very important for us to know as well, because there's a lot of misinformation out there as well, and some of that misinformation is mischievous. Yeah, so I just want to make that, set the record straight. All right. So between 1910 and 1912, Papa Garvey travels throughout South and Central America and throughout the Caribbean. He sought employment again and led strikes and petitions on behalf of workers. One of the most notable of these is the fact that Papa Garvey lived in and traveled through and worked in places like Costa Rica and Panama, in South and Central America and the Caribbean. In these places, Costa Rica, he was actually working for the United Fruit Company, which is today known as Chiquita, yes, which is an extremely notorious colonial and neo-colonial instrument of Western imperialism in general and American imperialism in particular. And so he led workers' rights movements and strikes, and even started a newspaper in Costa Rica, and as a result was run out of the country by the colonial authorities in Costa Rica. Whilst in Panama, he was actually among those who worked on the Panama Canal, which is an American imperialist project, yeah, in Panama that has become popular in recent months because Yah's president in the United States of America recently declared that he wishes to quote unquote take back, yes, the Panama Canal, brothers and sisters, on behalf of the United States of America. Well, Papa Garvey was working on that project for a period of time, and time doesn't allow to go into details, but the levels of exploitation that took place at the hands of these Europeans, yes, who were at the helm of this project, is again notorious. The numbers of Africans who were slain in the building of the Panama Canal is still yet to be known, brothers and sisters. And Papa Garvey was among those who was involved in movements challenging the authority of these Americans in collusion and in concert with other Europeans who were operating in Panama at that time. And so we understand that Papa Garvey's activism began during this period as a labor leader and as an anti-colonial activist. Yeah, this is before Papa Garvey becomes the man who we know as Marcus Garvey the Great, the leader of a movement of millions. He wasn't a leader of a movement of millions at this point. He's learning, he's studying, and he's a student of the masses of the people, and finds himself in positions whereby he's advocating on behalf of the masses in different circumstances. He then travels to Britain, where he lives between 1912 and 1914, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, in which I was born and raised and currently reside for the time being. He studied at Birkbeck College, and met African students and seamen who taught him of conditions in colonial Africa. He also was a journalist during this period for the African Times and Orient Review, which can be stated to have been the premier media publication from a Pan-African perspective during this period. Yes, during this time. And this is important because Deuce Muhammad Ali, who is the founder of the African Times and Orient Review, is an African from Sudan and what is today referred to as Egypt. Yeah, and there are many Africans from all over the continent who are writing for this publication, who visit Deuce Muhammad Ali in London, where he was based. And so Papa Garvey is now interacting with Africans from all over the continent, either in person or in word, in correspondence, yes, through the writing and his study with the African Times and Orient Review. He's also learning about anti-colonial struggles throughout Asia, throughout South and Central America, throughout the conditions throughout what is referred to today as the Middle East, and so on and so forth. Yes, and so his education is developing at a very fast pace during his period in London as well. And so it was whilst he was on his way back to Jamaica in 1914 that, in his own words, he said, I started to take an interest in the politics of my country. And then I saw the injustices done to my race because it was black. I became dissatisfied on that account. I went traveling to South and Central America to find out if it was so elsewhere. And I found the same situation. I sailed for Europe and again found the same stumbling block. you are black. I should also have stated that when Papa Garvey was living in the UK, he took the time to travel through other places in Europe as well. I read of the conditions in Washington, D.C., and then my doom, if I may call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London after I had traveled through almost half of Europe. And so Papa Garvey studying the conditions of African people, and he realizes that there's a certain level of organizing that needs to be done among African people if we are going to withstand and overthrow the powers that have their foot, their boots on our neck at that particular moment in time. Papa Garvey is, in fact, one of the most well-traveled Africans during this period. Yes. And his travel is also buttressed, as I've said, by interactions with Africans from various different places that he hadn't even been able to travel. And then he says, I asked, after going through all of that, reasoning and studying and travel, I asked, where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, and his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men and women of big affairs? I could not find them. And then I declared, I will help make them. So it's very important for us to understand what Africans are facing at this particular moment in time. Yeah. In the United States of America, we're dealing with Jim Crow segregation. We're dealing with daily lynchings. We're dealing with violence against African people in America, the United States of America being a fact of daily life. In the Caribbean, we are dealing with colonialism. We're dealing with similar conditions, yes, in terms of economic suppression of the masses of the people in the Caribbean. In fact, one of Papa Garvey's uncles was involved in what is referred to as the Morant Bay Rebellion that was led by Paul Bogle in the 1860s in Jamaica. So we're dealing with a condition of repression in the Caribbean that kept African people in a state of abject poverty and was designed to do so, brothers and sisters. We are also on the African continent dealing with the absolute and complete colonization of the African continent following the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. And there are some who suggest that with what African people were facing during this period, we were in danger, yes, of becoming re-enslaved as a people, or becoming on the road, moving on the road to extinction, as was faced in similar periods by the indigenous peoples of Australia and the indigenous peoples of New Zealand and the indigenous peoples of all over the Americas, brothers and sisters. Yeah. So the conditions facing African people globally were significantly detrimental. And in the words of the foremost scholar on the life and legacy of Papa Marcus Mosiah Garvey, Baba Tony Martin, he says that what Garvey was able to do in the building of a mass movement was reverse that trend, that trajectory, at the very least. So that where we were in danger of re-enslavement and possible extinction, he was able to reverse that particular trend. The question then becomes, how did he do it? How did they do it? I also want to emphasize the fact that Papa Garvey didn't say here, when he looked around, he said they couldn't find the army, the navy, the men and women of big affairs. He said, I will help to make them. He didn't say me alone, me one, yeah, me the great Marcus Garvey, I'm going to do it by myself. That's not what he said. He said, I will help, yes, right, to create what it is I'm not seeing at this moment in time. And so as a result, the vision of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, popularly referred to as the UNIA ACL, was founded in July of 1914, once again on the island of Jamaica, brothers and sisters. And Papa Garvey says, it is for me to inform you that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is an organization that seeks to unite into one solid body the 400 million Africans of the world, to link up the 50 million Africans of the United States of America with the 30 million Africans of the West Indies and the 40 million Africans of South and Central America with the 280 million Africans of Africa, for the purpose of furthering our industrial, commercial, educational, social, and political conditions. No, for the purpose of furthering our industrial, commercial, educational, social, and political conditions, brothers and sisters. You find this particular statement in an essay that Papa Garvey wrote called The Negro's Greatest Enemy, which is housed in the philosophies and opinions of Marcus Garvey, volume 2. And so the UNIA ACL is able to develop at least a membership of at least 11 million members worldwide, 1,000 branches, over 1,000 branches in 40 countries. They've created 2 steamship companies, a nursing agency, paramilitary and defense and security units, wholesale, retail, manufacturing businesses, schools and universities, newspapers and magazines, and an international industrial development program. That last one I won't go into too much detail in the presentation, but do bring me back to it in the discussion as and where necessary. So very, very briefly, to look at the institution building program of the UNIA-AC. I'm going to just zip through these. There was the Negro Factories Corporation, which is effectively and various different productive institutions that were catering for the needs of African people through the manufacturing and production of products, and also the sale of products. And you can see much of what they engaged in on the screen right here. Yes. And so as a result of this work, the UNIA ACL was able to employ over 1,000 African people in Harlem, New York alone. Okay, so this is just catering for the needs of African people within a particular context. Yeah, and we'll go a bit, we'll touch on the economic philosophy underpinning this in a second, and that needs to be done because of the fact that there are many people who are guilty of charging Papa Garvey and the UNIA ACL of being black capitalists. So bring me back to that in the discussion, and we'll deal with that expeditiously. There is also the Black Star Line Steamship Corporation, which many people would know of, which is a steam corporation. Now, there is some misconceptions about Black Star Line. Some say that it was a steamship company that was begun in order to transport African people back to Africa. This is an oversimplification of what it was really about. Papa Garvey was trying to link up the black world through trade and commerce and social interactions. Yeah. And so the idea was simply not to put some people on a ship and take them back to Africa. The Black Star Line ships were transporting goods and services throughout the Americas, and they didn't. No ship actually made it to the African continent, but the ships did travel between the United States of America, South and Central America, and the Caribbean, transporting things like coconuts and other produce, much of which was being farmed by Africans in these places. And so the aim was to develop a self-sufficient economy through which Africans could engage in trade with ourselves and each other. Yeah, and so much more could be said on that, but we'll move on for the sake of time. You have the Universal African Legion, which is a paramilitary unit. This particular unit was made up exclusively of men, but women, the men in the organization, the UNIA ACL, militarily trained. The women of the UNIA ACL and the women of the UNIA ACL who are militarily trained formed the Universal African Motor Corps. This is quite revolutionary, brothers and sisters, in the 1920s. Yeah, it was not common for women in Western society to be engaged members of a military, brothers and sisters, but the UNIA was dealing with that from that time. Okay. Then you also had the most active branch or auxiliary of the UNIA ACL was the Black Cross nurses, which engaged in health and social welfare services, yeah, midwifery, and even studies of basic home remedies and the publishing of medical self-healing material for African people around the world. It's the most active auxiliary of the UNIA ACL during the time of Papa Garvey, and again was exclusively made up of women, brothers and sisters. Then you have the Negro World newspaper, which was the media wing of the UNIA ACL and had a readership of hundreds of thousands of Africans around the world. and is arguably the most effective Pan-African media institution that we've ever developed. Yes, as a people, arguably that is the case. This newspaper was so effective that it was banned throughout the English-speaking world, as far as nations that were colonized by Britain. And on the continent of Mama Africa, you could be sentenced to death for being found with a copy of the Negro World newspaper. You could be sentenced to death or life or significant imprisonment for being found with a copy of the Negro World newspaper. And it is, in fact, within colonial records, the Negro World newspaper is cited as a contributory factor in many of the uprisings that took place among African people in places like Congo, in places like Kenya, in places like Southern Africa. Yes. So note that as well, brothers and sisters. Okay. So that's a little snippet on the impact that the Garvey movement, as it is referred to, was having on the continent of Africa. And then one of the major achievements of the UNIA ACL under the leadership of Papa Garvey, and I'm emphasizing that because we have to understand that the UNIA ACL still exists today. Yeah. So, but one of the major achievements of the UNIA ACL under the leadership of Papa Garvey during his lifetime is the International Convention of the Negro People of the World, which took place in 1920. Its opening session was held in Madison Square Garden, brothers and sisters, in New York in 1920. And Africans came from all around the world. And so, Madison Square Garden is very popular. Yeah. If you're an artist in popular music now, one of the things that you want to do is sell out Madison Square Gardens. Yeah. Well, in 1920, Madison Square Gardens was sold out, brothers and sisters, as a result of the International Convention of the African Peoples of the World, or the Negro Peoples of the World. And the two major achievements at this convention were, and when I say around the world, I mean around the world. Yeah. So Africans from the continent traveled to New York for this convention, many of whom traveled and registered in for the convention secretly. Yes, and anonymously, because it was felt that the delegates from the continent, many of them had to be protected because of the fact that they would have to return, yes, to a colonized continent to continue this work. And so some of the sessions with the Africans from the continent were held secretly behind closed doors for the sake of doing two things, achieving two things. The first was publishing the Declaration of Rights of the Negro Peoples of the World. Yes. So this declaration charts all of the injustices that Africans were dealing with at that time. And then it lists a number of declarations, rights that we are declaring and owning before the world at that moment in time. And then the UNIA ACL elevates its status to become a provisional government of African people. Yes. Within which Papa Garvey himself was elected, and I emphasize elected, as the provisional provisional president general of the government in exile. The government in exile, the aim of the government in exile was to fight for the complete decolonization of the African continent. The idea being that the governments that are currently in power on the African continent are illegitimate colonial governments. And so African people are going to organize outside of those illegitimate colonial governments and organize governments in exile that will fight for the decolonization and liberation of our continent. And once that is achieved, we were able to institute our own government based upon the provisional government that we have developed outside of what is taking place within the European world, brothers and sisters. Okay, we're taking back charge of our nations, our indigenous nations. All right. And so that's a bit on the UNIA ACL. As I said, so much more can be said, and on the life of Papa Garvey himself, so much more can be said. We'll get into that in the discussion, but I want to touch on the philosophical foundation for all of this work that I've just mentioned and all that came after, which is what is popularly referred to as Garveyism. But what we call Garveyism is more popularly referred to by two terms that have come out of the Garvey movement. One is African fundamentalism, and the second is universal African nationalism. And so what I tend to do is African fundamentalism is used to refer to the basic principles and foundations and the cultural inclination of the Garvey movement. And then universal African nationalism is in fact the political ideology. Yes, the political economy in the making that we refer to or is inspired by the life and legacy of Papa Garvey and those who organized within the movement that he led. All right. And so the major principles of African fundamentalism, which is the core of the political economy of universal African nationalism, are: 1, race first; 2, self-reliance; 3, nationhood; and 4, African spiritual cultural orthodoxy, or an African-centered cultural inclination. The first 3 that I've noted are actually identified and codified by Baba Tony Martin, the man who I've already mentioned as the foremost scholar on the life and legacy of Papa Garvey himself. And let me do what, because I've just realized that there's a slide missing, and it's criminal that this slide is missing. So let me correct that right now, and just say that whenever I do a presentation on Papa Garvey and the life and legacy of Papa Garvey and the UNIA ACL in philosophy and practice, I always begin by hailing the name of Queen Mama Amy Jakes Garvey, who is his second wife, and Baba Tony Martin. And the reason why I do so is because much of what we know about Papa Garvey and the UNIA ACL, what we know is the result of the meticulous work of these 2 individuals. Baba Tony Martin having inherited that work from Queen Mama Amy Jakes Garvey. Yes, and so I always begin by honoring them, because what I know as a student and a teacher of Garveyism is built upon that foundation. Yeah. And so Baba Tony Martin, in his work as a historian, identifies the first 3 principles. But in the Alkebulan revivalist movement, because we're a spiritually and culturally inclined organization, and we recognize the emphasis on spirituality and culture within the Garvey movement, we with the permission, I might add, of Baba Tony Martin, add African centered spiritual cultural inclination or orientation to these principles to make them 4. Okay, so let's break this down a bit further. What do we mean by race first? Papa Garvey says, in a world of wolves, one must go armed, and one of the most powerful defensive weapons within reach of African people is the practice of race first in all parts of the world. In other words, brothers and sisters, we as African people need to be principally and primarily concerned with our interests as African people. That's effectively what that means. But coming out of that, and my elders in the movement have entrusted me and encouraged me in this regard, in terms of codifying and updating and redeveloping and rearticulating universal African nationalism as a theory and a practice as a political economy. We say that to be race first, fundamentally, is to recognize the primacy of our African identity. Yes, that we are primarily and fundamentally an African people. Wherever else we are, yes, we are primarily and fundamentally an African people. I am an African from Jamaica and Antigua. Yes. Right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I'm an African born and raised in the UK. You can be an African born and raised in the United States of America. You can be an African born and raised in Nigeria or Kenya or South Africa. You can be African who is Igbo, yeah, or Kikuyu or Zulu. But all of our Kikuyu and Igbo and Zulu and Ewe comes together. And when we relate to each other as a people, we relate on the basis of being African Igbo, African Yoruba, African Bakongo, or Bakongo African, whichever way you want to put it, brothers and sisters. Yes, that there is no dichotomy between our unique experience and expression of Africanness and our collective experience of Africanness. But we put our Africanness first. Why? Because politically, it represents our largest political and social aggregate. Therefore, it is the basis upon which we can wield the most effective power, should we choose to do so, brothers and sisters. And within that regard, to be African recognizes African people as a unique and distinct, even with our variety within what it means to be African. The collective identity of African represents a unique and distinct biocultural entity. The identity of being African represents a unique and particular geopolitical entity, geo relating to land, politics relating to particular interests. And to be race first, brothers and sisters, within the context of being an African people, within the context of being a biocultural entity and a geopolitical entity, means that we cast our lot with the masses of our people, that we have a mass orientation, that we are not concerned with black faces in high places as a marker of progress, that our progress is not developed upon how rich and wealthy individual Africans are, how notable individual Africans are on the world stage, that our lot is cast with the masses of our people. So if the masses of our people are not developing, we as a people are not developing. Yes? And this is important because race first doesn't mean that we're going to support the next black politician just because they're black. We will support the next black politician in their Africanness to the extent that that politician is advocating on the interests of the masses of African people. So it's not race first to celebrate Barack Obama. Make it clear. Yes? Just because Barack Obama is black and has Kenyan extraction. You understand? That's not race first. It's not race first to celebrate your favorite artist just because they're black winning the Grammy. That's not race first. And in the discussion, we can go into and delve into race, because there's a lot of questions about the concept of race nowadays. So we can delve into that, but I'm defining it within a Garveyite context so people can understand. All right? I'm hearing a noise again. Does somebody want to say something?
No, carry on.
I am
okay,
here.
Cool. Carry on.
I'm drawing to the close.
Yeah, carry on.
Basic principles. So we dealt with race first. Now we're on self-reliance. Self-reliance. What does self-reliance mean? Power is the only argument that satisfies man, Papa Garvey says. Except the individual, the nation, the race has power that is exclusive. That individual, nation, or race will be bound by the will of others who possess this great qualification, i.e. power. If we don't have our own power, we will be subject to the power of other people who wield power over and against us. Hence, it is advisable for the Negro to get power of every kind. Power in education, power in science, power in industry, power in politics, power in higher government. That kind of power that will stand out so that other races and nations will see. And if they would not see, they shall surely feel. So this emphasizes the fact that the program of the UNIA ACL is essentially an institution building program. That the power of African people is going to be based upon and wielded through the institutions that we develop within and according to our own interests. That we have to organize ourselves to meet our own needs, essentially, brothers and sisters. Yes. And so that is now where we get into the institutions that were built by the UNIA ACL. Black Cross nurses, institution catering for the health and social welfare of the African masses. African Legionnaires, Universal African Motor Corps. We are a people who are under threat of daily violence. Therefore, we need to develop institutions to protect ourselves. We are a people who are, in fact, at war. War was declared on the African when the African was colonized. Therefore, we need to develop the institutions to kick the colonizers out of our land and our nations. That's a go on. Yes. What's the word? Universal Factories Cooperated. We need to develop institutions whereby we can develop toys for our children and clothes for our people to wear, and so on and so forth, etc., etc., etc. Okay? All right. Let's move on. Then we have nationhood. And this is particularly important because there are some people who are inspired to get into business. And they claim that their business endeavors are inspired by Papa Garvey because of the fact that the UNIA built and developed many businesses. If you do not understand all of the institutions, and I'm emphasizing the word institutions, not business, because of the fact that every business is an institution, but every institution is not a business, and the UNIA ACL has and does develop institutions that are not businesses. You understand? The Black Cross Nurses was not a business. It was an institution. If you do not understand all of that within the context of nationhood, then you are not dealing with Garveyism. What do I mean by that? Garveyism is not, we have 10 Black-owned corporations that are considered Fortune 500. Garveyism is not, we have 100 Black-owned corporations that are doing very well on the American stock market or the London Stock Exchange. It's not Garveyism. If all of that is not leading towards the development of not just businesses, but an economic system that we own and control and that benefits the masses of African people, it is not Garveyism. So you're not a Garveyite because you have a business. You're not a Garveyite if you have a business and your business is doing well. You're not even a Garveyite if your business is doing well and you're serving Black people. Garveyism is when that business, where business is contributing to the development of an independent, self-sufficient economy within the context of African nationhood that is benefiting the masses, not just yourself as an individual businessman or woman. We can get into this more into the conversation. In the discussion.
ShakaRa, I would love you to dig a bit deep into, you're talking about capitalism. How does that link up? Let's go there.
Let's save that for the conversation. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. Take notes, brother. Take notes.
yeah. Okay. All right.
But yeah, we'll go into that. All right, we'll go into that. But the astute among us will know how our brother's question, you know, it relates to what has just been said anyway. Yeah. All right. Let's save that for that. All right. So nationhood, Papa Garvey says, nationhood is the only means by which modern civilization can completely protect itself. Independence of nationality, independence of government is the means of protecting not only the individual, but the group. Nationhood is the highest ideal of all peoples. Yes. And then we get into African orthodoxy, or what I refer to as an African-centered cultural orientation. And this is arguably the most underappreciated principle within the Garvey legacy. Yes. And this gives us the well, as it says, cultural orientation for the institution building that we will engage in. Yes. Papa Garvey says it is necessary for the Negro to pay close attention to developing the appreciation for institutional life. It is incumbent upon him that he also have and control his own institutions based upon his own cultural and civilized idealisms. As for instance, he may have his own church, but it is not necessary for him to adopt the peculiar articles of faith of the churches of alien races. Yes, he goes on. He is not a Hebrew, therefore he would not adopt the Hebrew faith. He is not by origin a Roman Catholic nor an Anglican, because these faiths and religions were founded by white men with an idea of their own. In his religious philosophy, the African may safely adopt article of faith to link him to the Godhead of the Christian faith. God is God, the Creator is the Creator, and practice such as his particular religion. And so likewise with all other institutions. Now, it would be fair to say, brothers and sisters, that the more obvious elements of the development of this principle would not have taken place during the lifetime of Papa Garvey. This is something that was developed in more obvious ways post the lifetime of Papa Garvey himself. So we talk about now Africans discarding European names and reclaiming African names. That's a very obvious, some on the surface level manifestation of this particular command of Papa Garvey to develop our own institutions based upon our own culture and civilized idealisms. But the deeper level, brothers and sisters, of this command is not just the wearing of African garments, yes, which is important. The reclamation of African names, which is important. The appreciation for the cuisine of the African diaspora, which is important. All of the expression of our cultural mediums, yes, the dance, the music, all of which is important. But Papa Garvey is saying that we build our institutions on our own culture and civilized idealisms. That means, brothers and sisters, that our educational institutions are built on our own culture and civilized idealisms. That means that our business institutions are built upon our own culture and civilized idealisms. That means our political institutions are built upon our own culture and civilized idealisms. It means our economic systems are an expression of our culture and our civilized idealisms. So the deeper level, brothers and sisters, of this command is that when we are fulfilling it to its fullest extent, our government looks African. Our government looks like our culture. Our markets look like our culture. You understand? How we organize and distribute wealth looks like our culture. How we bring our children into the world looks like our culture. How we educate our children looks like our culture. But not only does it look like our culture, it serves the interests of our people. So it's not enough, for us to look African if the interest that we're serving is anti-African. In other words, we feel good because we can wear Agbada to the Grammys. Yeah? We can wear Ntuma in Tree, and Kente to the White House and to visit King Charles at Buckingham Palace. It's not enough for it to just look African. It has to be African in its core and serving the interests of the masses of African people at its core. That's Garveyism, brothers and sisters. That's African fundamentalism. That is universal Afrikan nationalism. It is through the institutions of the race that the civilization and culture of the race is built. The Negro should therefore occupy himself in cultivating his own culture and ultimately achieving his own civilized ends. And to close, brothers and sisters, looking at the Pan-African connection. So Papa Garvey is really the inheritor and there are some Garveyites who argue that Papa Garvey was not a Pan-Africanist. We'll go into that debate in this discussion if it's still necessary. But he really is the inheritor of the Black nationalist and a Pan-Africanist tradition that was began before him, by notable lights like Anna Julia Cooper, by notable lights like Martin Delaney, Edward Wilmot Blyden, etc. Yes, and he takes all of this and crystallizes it into the dominant organizational framework of these ideas in our history. Yeah, the most successful mass movement that sets the template for how to organize a mass movement on Pan-African ideals. Okay, or on universal African nationalist ideals, on Black nationalist ideals. And then, having consolidated all that came before him, he inspires all that comes after him in this regard. Yes. And so the most famous example of this, but it's not the only one, is this statement from Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah in his autobiography called Ghana. He said, I concentrated on finding a formula by which the whole colonial questions and the problem of imperialism could be solved. And that's important, right? Most people only quote the latter part of this, and I'm quoting the entire thing because you can see what Nkrumah was addressing when he made this statement. I read Hegel, Karl Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Mazzini. The writings of these men did much to influence me in my revolutionary ideas and activities, and Karl Marx and Lenin in particularly impressed me, as I felt sure that their philosophy was capable of solving these problems. But I think that of all the literature that I studied, the book that did more than any other to fire up my enthusiasm was the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, published in 1923. As I've already mentioned, Papa Garvey and the UNIA ACL, particularly through the Negro World newspaper, is noted as having inspired or contributed to the inspiration behind uprisings against colonialism in Congo. Yes. Even there are some scholars who suggest that the so-called Mau Mau rebellion, the rebellion of the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, Ibashe Dedan Kimati, we pay homage to Dedan Kimati, was at least in part inspired by the Garvey movement, particularly the decision to engage in armed warfare, in armed resistance against the British colonizer, was inspired by the Garvey movement and in general, and in particular, the teachings that came to Kenya through the Negro World newspaper. And there are other aspects I could go into in relation to that, but just suffice to say that there are many movements and leaders and so on and so forth that come up after the lifetime of Papa Garvey. Papa Garvey died in 1940, that attest to the fact that he and the Garvey movement were key in their development as Pan-African organizers, institutions, and even much of the leaders of the anti-colonial movement on the African continent call Garvey's name as a part of their inspiration. So I hope that I've been able to give a broad overview of the life of Papa Garvey and the political economic philosophy of universal African nationalism. Thank you very much.
ShakaRa, thank you very, very much for that. And also the way you just captured up with the link to capitalism, to Pan-Africanism, sorry. I just love how you rounded that up. That basically explains a lot, because people have even wondered, what's the link between Marcus Garvey and Pan-Africanism? So now you explained it, that he's the catalyst that brought about the mindset revolution among other people. Yeah, thank you for that.
I don't want to say the catalyst. Yeah. He was a catalyst and a central catalyst and an important one. But remember that Papa Garvey doesn't. He is a student of others, right? You know what I'm saying? Who are responsible for bringing about the theory, the ideas, and who are organizing in different ways prior to him, and he inherits that and maximizes it on a certain level. Yeah. So he's a catalyst, and I think we can give him credit for being the catalyst in some areas. So he's the catalyst in terms of the expression of a mass movement. Yes. Like nobody's done it like Papa Garvey before or since as a mass movement. He is the catalyst in terms of giving Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism its organizational form. Nobody organized like specific institutions in the way that he did. Yes, before. So like there were people that were organizing different institutions, but he was able to bring different institutions together in one movement, if that makes sense. So there are things that he's uniquely responsible for. And even to say he and those who he was organizing with. are responsible for. So yeah, and I hope that's clear. Yeah.
Collective economics as well. That was
Right.
no one done that.
So let's go into that, and that goes into brother Oladele's question in terms of capitalism. Yeah. The reason why Papa Garvey is referred to quite simply as a capitalist is because he had battles with the communist movement of his time. Yes, and I'm actually in the process. Well, I've been in the process for years of doing some work specifically on this subject. On was Marcus Garvey a capitalist? So you're gonna have to wait a little bit for the full presentation, right? For the full work, yeah. But suffice to say that Papa Garvey admired communist Russia. Now, bear in mind that communism during his time, and to a significant degree today, was defined almost exclusively by communist Russia. Yes, Papa Garvey was a supporter of what particularly Lenin was doing on behalf of the Russian people and the Russian masses. However, he didn't consider the communist fight to be the African fight, and was wary of allowing the communists to take over the African movement. So whilst he supported Lenin, what Lenin was doing in Russia, just like he supported what the Irish freedom fighters were doing to free their own people, or people that are trying to free themselves from something, in some way, shape, or form, Papa Garvey himself and the Garvey movement in general tended to support freedom movements for self-determination of any peoples. But that we as African people had our own specific interests in that regard. And because of this, he became a target of the communist movement in America, who were trying to rope the masses of African people into the workers of the world. Workers of the world, unite and fight. Papa Garvey and the nationalists around him are saying, as African people, we have a particular interest, a particular plight here that cannot be catered for by workers of the world, especially because the workers' movement had not been able to overcome its own anti-blackness, its own anti-Africanness, its own racism. Yes? And so it would be a folly for us, in the words of Papa Garvey, to subdue ourselves under the masses of the white working class who have not been able to overcome their animus towards us. Race first. Yeah, right. There's another justification for race first, right? So a lot of the narrative, because the Marxism and socialism and communism has quite a stranglehold in terms of how history, the intellectual world, the intellectual realm, university, and so on and so forth. Because of that, and because a significant amount of the Pan-African movement, let's be real, went down the socialist route. Yeah. A lot of the appreciations of Papa Garvey have come through that lens, if that makes sense. Right. So Papa Garvey has been labeled a black capitalist or a capitalist in that regard. But when you look at the praxis of the movement itself, i.e., extracting the theory from how the movement operated itself economically, you will see and understand quite clearly that the economics underpinning Garveyism during the time of Papa Garvey till now is collectivist in nature. In other words, if capitalism is the private ownership of the means of production, the Garvey movement was not fighting for individual private ownership of the means of production in the hands of individual Africans. This was not a goal, yeah? Anywhere in the Garvey movement, there was no elite class in the Garvey movement that anybody can. No, I've asked this question. Nobody can identify for me where the elite corporate class in the UNIA ACL was developing. You understand? Yeah. And so all wealth, all institutions within the framework of Garveyism were designed to benefit the masses of African people. Does that mean, maybe I shouldn't go into this because we're going deep into things, but I should say it doesn't necessarily.
Go for it.
Does that mean the complete abolishment of what is referred to as private property? Yeah. The answer is possibly not. But I don't know anywhere in the world that under communism that was achieved either, right? And we don't call Lenin a capitalist, right? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And then now we would have to get into the distinction between what is called personal property and what is called private property, even within a Marxist framework. But the point is, regardless of the extent to which people could own this, that, and the what next, the wealth of African people within the Garvey movement was to be owned and controlled and benefiting the masses of African people. And I can articulate that in so many words, brothers and sisters, from the mouth of Papa Garvey himself.
But just to add to what you said, ShakaRa,
Mm-hmm.
in African culture, as far as I can remember, and from what I have read, there's no such thing as private property. Because even the individual, it's you, your wife, your children, the community. When I go back home, to this day, I'm known of being a member of such and such a clan. When I say my name, I'm known of being a member of such and such a clan. And when you settled for you and your community and your generations to come. So private ownership of property is not something that is innate to who we are as a people, as one Ubuntu.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why. And first of all, I hate that people say Nkrumah is a Marxist, because he's not. And I'm glad that today you showed proof that he's not, in his own words. He may have read Marxism, and it's important for all of us to read these white people's philosophies and writings so that we can understand who they are, because they are our enemy. We need to understand how they move. So that's what he did. But once he read that and compared it to Garvey's, he says himself in his own words that was superior to what he had read before. So besides the point, let's put that there. I'm glad you did that. Thank you. Check.
I do want to say, because I don't want to be accused of misleading people. But Nkrumah did critique Garvey, yeah, in some aspects, right? And some of his critiques did come, I would argue, from a socialist or Marxist lens. He self-defined more as a socialist than a Marxist. Let's be clear about that. And I think that we need to be contextual when we have these conversations about our movements. That Marxism provided a critique of capitalism for many African people, and an understanding of the economic system that under which we were colonized and oppressed. Yeah, that the British and the French and the Belgians and the Portuguese and so on, they were not coming under a socialist or communist banner when they came to colonize. It was capitalism that they were dealing with, right? And so because Marx's work, more than it is actually a definition or an affirmation of what socialism or communism is, his work is mostly a critique of capitalism from within the capitalist framework. Yeah, and as Baba Amos Wilson said, there's usage for that. There's usefulness. Yeah, within that context. All right. The issue is when we allow our paradigm to be defined by it, completely defined by it. Yeah. And this is necessary to note because there are some who are favorable to Garvey and try to embrace Papa Garvey and use him to justify their capitalist inclinations, if that makes sense. And I'm very, very wary of that. Yeah, I'm very, very wary of that as a Garveyite. As much as I've said that a lot of the history was defined by the lens through which white socialists in particular were seeing Garvey himself, there is just as much, and if not more, danger based upon the world as we know it, in people trying to commandeer the legacy and the work of Garvey and the UNIA ACL in a way that will justify the current capitalist political economy that currently governs the global world order, if that makes sense. And unfortunately, I find that not enough of us as African-centered folk who are critical of and wary of socialist, communist takeover of our movement, we don't seem to be as vigilant about the attempted and very real, and I would argue far more prevalent, capitalist takeover of our movement.
Yeah. No, we actually, myself and my brother here, have been talking about the encounters we've had in the last 2 weeks where we keep having seemingly revolutionary brothers and sisters drop. Capitalism is always at the center of it. And this is a huge problem. Even in Kenya, as I was engaging with my fellow Kenyans in the rejection of the current government, and which is going to take me to my question, I said to them, we must say goodbye to capitalism. And I have one who responded, but I like my shoes, right?
Because shoes never existed until capitalism.
Imagine that, right? Like that was a response that was given to me of all people, and that person expected me to give grace. So thank you for that explanation. The other thing I'll say too about the leaders before I ask my question is, and I talked about this yesterday. There's a brother who had invited me for a session. He's a brother in Nigerian. For those of you who follow me, you'll see it on my posts. Just go watch that. But these misleaders, right? In Nkrumah's case, leader, Marcus Garvey's case, leader. These leaders were miseducated in a Western system of education. So they have that white culture in them that absolutely. They're also struggling with. So what we are doing is learning about them, taking a look at what we've learned, and being very intentional about seeing what is Western about them, because we understand Western culture has done us no good, right?
Absolutely.
Taking that and putting it to the side, essentially using a sieve, taking what is best for us to move going to uphold well-being, and putting aside what is not, learning from their mistakes. So with Nkrumah, learning that we should not base our movement on socialism or Marxism. Why? Because it shows you what mistakes Nkrumah made based on that, right? So that's my advice to us all, and I'm glad you addressed that and provided clarification. My question: why does Garvey refer to the African nations as illegitimate? Break it down, please.
We're dealing with, as I said, the Berlin.
I think they are to this day. So break it down, please.
Brother. Oh no, yeah, they are. No, this is a beautiful question. This is a very, very beautiful question. Yeah. So Garveyism again is not just having black heads of government, right? This is very important. If the governments are not serving the interests of the masses of the people, this is outside of the realms of Garveyism. Okay. The governments of Garvey's time were illegitimate because they were front-facing, out-and-out colonial governments. So the question then becomes, would Papa Garvey, and within the framework of Garveyism, do the governments that we currently have in majority black nations, would they be considered for the most part acceptable within the framework of universal African nationalism? This is a good question, yeah? Because it's
definitely not.
Right, you know what I'm saying? It's race first, yeah? So, Tinubu is black, yeah? Ramaphosa, yeah? And Ruto, they're African, you know what I'm saying? They're not only African, they speak African languages. Yes, sure. Right? You know what I'm saying? And eat African food, and, well, very rarely. I mean, Tinubu, he'll throw an agbada here and there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen Ramaphosa or Ruto in anything but a suit. You know what I'm saying? Right? But would this be considered within the thing? Now, and there's an interesting so when I spoke about the industrial development program of the UNIA ACO. I said I'll go into the discussion. This is specifically referring to a program that the UNIA ACO was developing to move its headquarters from New York to Liberia. Yes. And during this process, they were developing an industrial development program so that they could go to Liberia and build among the people. It's popularly said that the UNIA ACO bought land through negotiation with the Liberian government during that time. That was under the leadership of President King. But I interviewed a sister whose name is gone out of my head, from Liberia a couple of years ago. And she said actually the UNIA ACO for the most part was granted the land through conversation and camaraderie with indigenous leaders on the ground in Liberia. Yes. So that we're not talking about the government now. We're talking about the indigenous leadership. Yeah. What they would commonly refer to as the chiefs. Okay. This is going to be a long answer to your questions this year, but it will be a thorough one. All right. Okay. All right. They were going to engage in an agricultural and industrial development program and transport a couple over 1,000, I can't remember exactly, but families to Liberia to work among the people in Liberia. What happened was the neighboring colonial empires, Britain and France in particular, were very, very wary of a UNIA power base on the African continent and started to put pressure on the Liberian government and because the Liberian government was effectively a satellite of the American government, if you understand the history of Liberia, those same colonial powers were able to exert pressure on the American government, to exert pressure on the Liberian government to ensure that the UNIA ACO's program was going to be attacked. What eventually happened in 1924, the UNIA ACO sent a delegation of agricultural and industrial experts and engineers to Liberia with an estimated $50,000 worth of agricultural and industrial equipment to Liberia to begin this program. When they landed, the delegation was not allowed to disembark the ship. The goods that they had brought with them were seized. The land that had been apportioned to the UNIA ACO was sold to the Firestone Rubber Company. For pennies on the acre. Yeah? Pennies. They were effectively given the land. Almost free. Millions of acres. Right. So land that was apportioned for the UNIA ACO was taken from them and given to the Firestone Rubber Company that still owns land in Liberia today and went on to effectively enslave the people of Liberia from that time, 1924, up until now. 99-year lease, and they renewed the lease last year. Okay? So, during this time, also, America had occupied Haiti in the Caribbean, Haiti. And in delegation in 1924, the UNIA ACO wrote a letter, I believe it was to the Haitian government, warning against offering concessions, that means privileges, to American corporations in Haiti. Because they warned that the granting of concessions to American corporations in Haiti will eventually lead to the usurpation. No, sorry, I'm getting this the other way around. They wrote a letter to the Liberian government using Haiti as the example, saying don't allow these Western corporations to come into your land, because the allowance of these Western corporations is going to result in the usurpation of the government, as was done in Haiti when white capitalist institutions went into the country under the guise of assisting the people. Right. The UNIA ACL wrote that letter in its convention in 1924. Osajifo Kwame Nkrumah said that the essence of neocolonialism is that the nation state has all of the trappings of international sovereignty, but in reality, it's economic policy. Sorry, yes, it's economic policy, and therefore its political trajectory is governed from outside. Kwame Nkrumah said that in 1965. That's in Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. The UNIA ACL was identifying neocolonialism in 1924. You understand? So that is the idea that you've got a government in blackface. Liberia had a government in blackface. Haiti had a government in blackface. Yes? But when with the influx of Western corporations, we started to see the use, the capture of the state. And the state is now working in the interest of the corporations. So I say all that to say, brothers and sisters, that in Kenya, when William Ruto attempts to institute a finance bill that is based upon the dictates of the International Monetary Fund, and when the people rise up and say, no, we don't want this IMF business round here, you command your police to shoot protesters in the leg, that is neocolonialism. That is white power in blackface in Kenya, brothers and sisters. When the people of Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger rise up and say, we don't want no French neocolonizer around here anymore. We don't want no French CFA franc. We don't want no French corporation. We don't want nothing French. Yes. In our nation. And the Economic Community of West Africa, ECOWAS, rise up, and Tinubu, president in Nigeria, announces that he is going to invade. Yes. Lead the ECOWAS invasion into Nigeria. That is white power in blackface. You understand? And the essence of Garveyism is that we must be in control of our own institutions, and that our own institutions must serve the interests of the masses of our people. So no, the states that we have today, for the most part, and there are some that are trying, but for the most part, the states that we have in majority black nations in Africa and the Caribbean do not represent a Pan-African vision or a universal African nationalist vision.
But they're also, quickly, Oladile, but they're also illegitimate based on returning to who we are and based on being founded on Afrocentrism. They're not African, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
It's important that you explain that because, and especially for my Kenyan brothers and sisters, I need you to understand that you cannot talk about, oh, we're going to organize to have the next leader within that system. You cannot. Because it's going to be the same thing repeatedly. You're either going to be killed or you will have to align with what the demands of those who are controlling the systems present to you. Absolutely. But also, brother ShakaRa, it's important that you explain Liberia, what's happening exactly, because it's not the indigenous people of Liberia. It's those who are brought from here, who go there with a Western mind, with a white mind. The United States claims to have established Liberia in 1822, despite the fact that there were people existing there that had already established that entity or settlement or existence. I'll call it that. And it was formed, and I don't even know, like, just the name of it tells you the mindset of the Black people who were sent there. The American Colonization Society. Right? So please explain who these Black people who were, because US is all over that. The FBI is all over that. Like
100%.
Right? So that's why they have the corporations there. But talk about that, please.
Yeah, there's nuance there though, sis. in the sense of the fact that so Liberia begins, as does Sierra Leone, for similar reasons. Yeah, you got Africans who are fighting against slavery in the Americas. Some of those Africans have a nationhood mentality. Both Britain and what becomes the United States of America during the American Revolution, yeah, and my brother Mansa Fode, who is the third Assistant President General of the UNIA ACL-RC 2020 and founder of the Black Star Action Network International, is an expert on this history, and I would encourage you to bring him on to break it down. Yeah, Liberia and Sierra Leone. Yeah, he's an expert, all right, and he lives in Sierra Leone as well. But both sides are promising Africans varying levels of freedom if they fight on each side, whatever side. Yeah. Now, apparently, more Africans fought on the side of the British during the American so-called Revolutionary War than they fought on the side of the so-called Americans, right? That would later create the United States of America. So these nations were formed as really a promise to those who fought on behalf of these nation states, but many went with a very Pan-African mentality. Let us remember that there were some on the African continent who were also colonized in our mentality in what is called today Liberia and Sierra Leone. So you have Africans on both sides of that equation. There are many Africans who welcomed their brothers and sisters to come and return. Welcome, brother. There were some Africans who didn't. There were some Africans who were concerned about their relationship with Britain or France or so on and so forth, and related to the Africans who returned based upon their relationship to Britain and France, as opposed to their relationship with the Africans. And then there were some Africans who returned, who related to other Africans who were in those places based upon their allegiance to Americanism or Britishism against the interests of the masses of our people. And so those conflicts manifested themselves in various different ways. And because of the fact that America never let Liberia just go and develop, they maintained the power over the leadership in Liberia. Yes. And so those people who were in leadership have consistently been able to be used against the interests of the masses, whether they were quote unquote indigenes or Americo-Liberians. Yeah. They've been able to be used against them. And what I refer to as Bakra imperialism, Bakra being a term for the European. Many of us went to Liberia with a Bakra imperialist mentality and served the interests of Bakra imperialism whilst we were in Liberia. And Papa Garvey was aware of this, very, very critical of the leadership in Liberia when the brothers and sisters who were working on behalf of the UNIA went there. Very, very critical, and said that, we would have to address the disparities in living conditions, wealth, and so on and so forth as we grow and develop our program whilst we're over there. So I hope that addresses that. But like I said, if you want an in-depth explanation of that history, please invite Mansa Fode on, and I'll be most glad to facilitate that with you.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for that. We're looking forward to that. Okay, just to drive it home, my brother, man. We've basically talked about Garveyism. We talked about what Marcus Garvey stood for, and so as we do what we do, and what bothers me every day, and I wake up as an African, is despite all the hard work that these brothers have done to show us the way forward as Africans in the diaspora on the continent, why could we not make it work? Why can we not make it happen? Because we seem to be struggling all the freaking time, excuse my language. And it's frustrating to see how so many of we Africans are coconuts. Like you've mentioned, that we think are called as Negropeans. We can't seem to think as an African to do the work that needs to be done to make us holistically healed from imperialism.
Yeah, my brother. I think so this year we're celebrating the centenaries of Papa Patrice Lumumba, Omowale Malcolm X, and Frantz Fanon.
And Medgar Evers.
Medgar Evers, you could say Robert F. Williams. There's a few others as well. But those three have been, significantly elevated. And I think partly because one is in the United States, one is is in the Caribbean, and one is on the continent. So there's a whole diaspora, you know, that is being represented there. Fanon, I have my differences with Fanon in some ways, but one of the things that as a psychiatrist he was very clear on is the need for is the extent to which the engagement in the liberation movement is a form of psychological therapy. Yes. Like all of our greats, he had his contradictions, and I don't think he was able to overcome some of his own. Yeah. You know, in that regard, but that's another subject for another time. Yeah. But the point is that he was clear about it in his writing. Yes. And the fact is that psychological element is one that we need to pay more attention to. Yeah. And Garvey, many people say he was a master psychologist. So one said that he was able to sell the African to ourselves. Yeah. You know, it's like we were not used to seeing ourselves in such magnificence and such grandeur, and considering ourselves as the most elevated of all things. Yeah. And he was able to inspire us with that vision, even though when we looked around ourselves, no evidence of it yeah, appeared to exist. And I think that we need to take a leaf out of Fanon's book in terms of understanding the extent to which the oppression of African people is a psychological oppression, and engage in the breaking of the chains of that psychological oppression. One of, not the only, but one of the ways I think this needs to be done is through the thinking about and articulating political economy in African terms. This is why I go into emphasizing the African-centered spiritual cultural orientation as an aspect of Garveyism, because we reduce our culture to the expressions of the culture, as I was saying earlier: the dance, the food, the names, maybe the language. When we go deeper into the language teaches us about our political economy. Yeah. I love my sister Nduku when she says we must refer to Kiswahili as the Ki-Ubuntu language. Yeah. And I do that on a regular basis. And I quote you and I cite you when I do so, my sister. Not because we must reclaim even how our language has been referred to by ourselves. Sometimes we've been so indoctrinated that our indoctrination has become traditional, right, among ourselves. Yeah. And so we think that, yes, when we're talking about music and food, we can think in African terms. But if we're thinking about government and policy, yes, then we must do away with the African and adopt whatever we learn in university from Adam Smith and Karl Marx, and negotiate these two things in order to economize. That we must say president. And I'm not even saying that there's not a use for these languages given our current context, right? We're conducting this conversation in English, for example. Yeah. It's just a necessity based upon our current context. But that we must delve into what it means to be an Akomfo in the Tree language. You understand? What does that really mean? What social responsibility, what political responsibility, what economic responsibility did that give you to your people in our indigenous social order? What does it mean to be Oba? Yoruba. What does it mean to be Bako? Ewe. What does it mean to be Nganga? Bakongo. In the indigenous systems. Because it meant something. It meant something that has been superseded and usurped by the colonial and the neo-colonial agenda. So building our own culture along our own, building our institutions along our own cultural and civilized idealisms helps us to add and restore prestige to our culture intellectually, that we can think in socio-political and economic terms within African paradigms. And that does so much to undo a whole heap of colonial conditioning, brothers and sisters. So there's a work that our generation, I would say, has to do in terms of the intellectual rigor that we apply to our own systems on the political and the economic realm. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to see some things that we think we need to correct. Yeah? Our ancestors are beautiful, worthy to be praised, but like they weren't perfect, right? You understand what I'm saying? We don't have to live in any illusion. Yeah? Some things that we have that are traditional were actually responses or introduced to us through colonialism, and some things weren't. And we're going to have to find some things that we're going to correct. However, there's so much beauty and power and functionality within it as well. And I think we're going to find that most of what we find, when all we need to do is reclaim and adjust and update and modify to suit current circumstances. But our ancestors were wise and beautiful and powerful. And if we're really going to free our people, we need to embrace the indigenous social orders of our people and utilize them, weaponize them for revolutionary purposes.
Absolutely brilliant. It's just basically we need to go back to our Ubuntu foundations. Ubuntu economics, like a sister on LinkedIn says, we need Ubuntu economics. I think that's our foundational principles, man.
Oh, yes.
So we have to understand what that is, because the word has been co-opted by whiteness.
Yeah, but wait, like ShakaRa said, we need to reclaim it and really basically put meat on the bone. We need to flesh it up.
Oladele, I know it's already 1.5 hours, but I have 2 questions that we're not going to let Brother ShakaRa go before we ask.
And I've got some questions down there, about 3 questions from the audience. So yeah, please.
So I'll start, and I know both of them, your answer is not going to be short, but let's start with race. No, and that's what I want. We're not playing games here. We're in class. We're learning, not just for the sake of talking, so that you can go implement, so that we can liberate ourselves. Our lives are at risk daily. Our brothers and sisters are dying in Congo, in Sudan, everywhere on the continent, in Kenya. So this is not a game. This is not about clicks. This is not about subscriptions. This is serious business. This is life.
Absolutely.
So explain race fast, so that these people who are colonial mentality people can understand what exactly, because you have NBAs, you have ADOSs, you have all kinds of nonsense coming up from, and it's all white funded, and they won't tell us this, but it is white funded and white inspired. It is all based on the false notion of white supremacy. Absolutely. So please explain what race fast means.
There's a great scholar, now ancestor, by the name of Asa Hilliard. I'm sure you would have come across him, Sister Nduku, your studies in America, yeah? And you yourself as well, Robert Oladele. And he speaks about mental bondage. And he says, mental bondage is invisible violence, he says. Formal physical slavery has ended, but mental slavery continues to this day. This slavery affects the minds of our people, and in some ways is worse than formal physical slavery alone. He said, not only will the person who is subject to mental bondage fail to challenge the beliefs and patterns of thought which control them, they will defend and protect these beliefs and patterns of thought virtually with their last dying effort. I say all that to say that when we see anti-Africanness among African people, it is always induced by an allegiance to some form of whiteness, to some form of background. Yeah. And so we have this even developing, you mentioned FBA and whatever. We have this developing even among Africans in the UK, whereby we're coming up to Notting Hill Carnival at the moment, which is the month of Messiah, August. and which is celebrated at the end of that month. And every year there's a battle that takes place regarding the idea that somehow Afrobeats is taking over Carnival, and Carnival is a Caribbean, yes, affair. We have some Africans who are now attempting to reject an African identity and asserting a Caribbean identity in opposition to an African identity. And some of them are so blatant that they now want to affirm that we Caribbeans in the UK are British Caribbean. We are not African Caribbean. We are British Caribbean. Yes? So you see that the intention is an allegiance to Britain. ADOS, American descendants of slavery, defined in opposition to African. FBA, foundational Black American, defined in opposition to what it means to be African. So the inclination, the orientation here is allegiance to Britain, allegiance to the United States of America, allegiance to France. And any inclination that seeks to affirm Black people, African people, as intrinsically interconnected is a threat to Bakra imperialism, whether that Bakra imperialism is French, British, or American, or Israeli, or etc. So within the colonized mindset of African people that are allegiant to Bakra, they know this. So they know that when they affirm whatever they are affirming, they have to attack the African identity. They have to attack the race-first inclination, which guides African people to see brotherhood and sisterhood among each other across the waters. That I see my Igbo brother and my Bakonga brother and my Kikuyu brother and my Luo and my Dinka brother and sister. And I immediately, my initial inclination is to see my brother and my sister. Not a stranger, yes, but a brother and a sister, because they understand that this inclination can become political. And so race first is not just I see my brother and my sister as my brother and my sister. Race first is the political understanding of what it means to be an African, and the intention to maximize that political understanding into political power. That is what race first essentially is. And when we understand that, we understand ourselves in terms of relationship, not antagonism. So we will understand the relationship of soca and calypso to Afrobeats and soukous as complementary and not antagonistic. Even if we say Carnival is an environment for soca to dominate the scene. Nothing wrong with that. Carnival comes out of a particular expression of Africanness in the diaspora. And it's fine for that particular expression to dominate the scene at Carnival. But that we don't see and we don't create illusions of antagonism between the music of the continent and the music of the diaspora. That we understand that there is space for all our music, and that we can celebrate it as Africans together in varying different circumstances. So when the African from Nigeria comes to Carnival, him can enjoy some soca music. Yes? And when the African from Jamaica goes to Oshogbo, yes, him can enjoy the indigenous, because there's various different indigenous music forms among our people. Our Yoruba people, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I'm using it as a basic example, but I'm using real issues to highlight. I've even heard Pan-Africanists, delving into this strippingness about whether Afrobeat should be played at Carnival. It's nonsense, and it's not only nonsense because of what I'm saying. It's nonsense because it's actually not a reality. That it's not happening. Afrobeats is not I'm speaking to Africans in the UK or anywhere Africans are that Carnival is being celebrated, and there is a debate about Afrobeats. Afrobeats is not taking over Carnival. It is not happening anywhere in the world. I have never been on the road or seen anywhere in the world whereby there is more or even half the music you'd be playing at Carnival is Afrobeats. It's a stupid argument. Nonsense. And any Pan-Africanist, any African-centered individual who is engaging in that nonsense, you should be ashamed of yourself. And may our ancestors kindly put you in your place and bring you back to yourself. Thank you.
I love it. See, today I can calm down because, brother, you have the front lines, and I'm glad to have you. I am sitting, sipping tea, and letting you take care of these nonsensical brothers and sisters of ours. But explain quickly before my next question. Explain what Bakra is.
Yeah, sorry, Bakra. So there are actually various different etymologies for this term. Bakra means white people, white man. Yeah. The etymology that I was gifted as a child is that. So first of all, I should say that Bakra is a terminology that you will find across the Americas for the European. Yeah. So you'll find it among Africans in the Caribbean. You'll find it among Africans in the English-speaking Caribbean, Jamaica, Trinidad, Antigua, etc. You'll find it among Africans in the French-speaking Caribbean, Haiti, yes, Martinique, etc. And you will also find it among Africans in the United States of America, particularly those in the South, especially those among the Gullah Geechees of the Carolinas. And so one explanation that I was given is because it was a referral to the punishment that the enslaver used to give our ancestors. So the whipping used to make the back raw. Yes. So we refer to them as the Bakra, the ones who make our backs raw. However, and I don't recall, but I have heard that that's actually not the case, that it actually comes from I'm forgetting which language, but an African language. It's an evolution of a word from an African language.
So the people who use ba in front of words is the Bakongo.
Yeah, it's possible. I can't say. I can't remember what the etymology that I'm gonna have to find that again. But yeah, so it's same meaning, but it's actually a derived from an indigenous terminology that we brought from the continent for these people who are capturing, us from our motherland. So when I use it, I'm referring to Europeans, European power systems, European imperialist structures, which is why I say Bakra imperialism.
The Wazungu, in other words.
The Wazungu, the Oyibo, the Obruni, the Tubab. Yeah, it's them that I'm referring to, and their systems of power.
Thank you for adding that vocabulary to my when I need to be petty with them, when I need to stick it to them. So the last question from me, I believe Pan-Africanism has been co-opted mainly by the CIA and many other covert operatives. They have infiltrated it and it does not move. Here's an evidence. Museveni apparently is still the head of the Pan-African movement. Yoweri Museveni. And I was invited to...
Laughable.
I was invited to be a member of a certain African group that was actually saying this to me and expecting me to be okay with moving along with it. And I had to leave because of it, just because of that. It seems petty for me to leave, but I'm like, the foundation is not solid. So I cannot support you in building this when I know the foundation is not solid.
Absolutely.
So we abandon, but not just because it's been co-opted, because I don't believe that's the only reason why we should abandon. Like Ubuntu has been co-opted, but it's a very important principle in our culture, so we cannot abandon it. Not only has Pan-Africanism been co-opted, but even as you speak today of Marcus Garvey, there's a deeper meaning to it. So should we adopt, and this has been proposed, Afrocentrism, so that we can move in a more Afrocentric way, so that we understand this is not just about an ism, it is about how our culture changes and how we move culturally.
You're pushing me, sister, into a minefield with this question.
That's why you're here, my brother, man.
I know, I'm looking at the trajectory of this question. I'm like, there's any number of minds.
I mean, we can have you come back and we can talk about Afrocentrism.
We may have to do that, and that may be a panel conversation as well.
Yes.
But I would say this. first of all, I did allude to the fact that there are some Garveyites who don't like to refer to Papa Garvey as a Pan-Africanist. I think most Pan-Africanists have gone through a phase at least where they're like, you know what, I'm not even sure if I want to continue using this terminology for exactly the reason that you said. And there are all kinds of debates there among the Pan-Africanists who do still. Sorry, among the Garveyites who are Pan-Africanists who do still embrace the term, the reasoning is that the term, especially after 1945, began to be used as an umbrella term for any kind of pro-African anti-imperialist politics. And so Garveyism is an expression of, just like the Pan-African socialism is an expression of, and etc., etc. So we don't need to do away with the umbrella terminology if we understand how it's evolved through time, how our ancestors used it. I have sympathy with that argument. I'm also, though, sympathetic to the idea that we need to, because of exactly what you're saying, develop more clarity. Yes? And so sometimes that clarity comes with new terminology or a re-emphasis of old terminology. So now I don't discard the term Pan-African, but I'm at lengths to make it clear that my Pan-Africanism is Garveyite in its inclination. Right? And this is what that means. My Pan-Africanism is African-centered in its inclination, and that's what that means. Yeah, this is what that means. And that's a process that we're going to have to go through as a movement, as all movements do. At the same time, the particular example that you use is one that I think is a product, I agree, of CIA intrigue, MI6 intrigue. I forget what the French ones are called, intrigue. Yeah, right. Mossad intrigue, etc., etc. And if we study Papa Patrice Lumumba, we will know the extent to which the CIA was invested in defining how Africa developed and the relationship between Africans of the diaspora and Africans on the continent. But I'm saying all that to say that I think that there's been a diminishment in political education among our movement, within our movement, and therefore among our people. Because I don't think previous generations will have been as confused on Museveni. The one that incenses me at the moment is Paul Kagame. The extent to which there are people who call themselves Pan-Africanists who are hailing Paul Kagame as not just a Pan-Africanist, but the preeminent Pan-Africanist of our time. It incenses me because of the level of criminality that this man has been involved in. And we can say the same for Museveni. But Museveni, I find, for the most part, has been identified. I'm not saying that there's nobody, especially nowadays, because we're so confused by a lot. And because, but for the most part, because Museveni's been there for so long, he has been known to be an American puppet, sustained by America from since time. Yeah? And I think a diminishment of our political education means that whenever any leader says anything anti-West, we consider them Pan-African. Museveni is old enough, has been around long enough, and is astute enough to know that whenever the Bakra imperialists has had their man in Africa, there comes a time when he's outlived his usefulness. And I think Museveni is aware of the fact that he has outlived his usefulness as far as being an agent of Bakra imperialism in Africa. And so he is attempting to shift the dynamic by saying some anti-Western things to endear himself with the masses of African people. And only through, Baba Kwame Ture says, we must always be engaged in the political education of our people because our enemies are always politicizing us. So it's only through more and more effective levels of political education that we will be able to gift our people with the signs and the symbolisms and the tools of analysis that we need to be able to see a Museveni for who and what he is. You know, so yeah, I hope that answers your question at least to some degree. My
Yes,
sister.
it does. And just to stand by you, Kagame is no Pan-Africanist. And that's the other thing too. On top of being clear about this, defining these words, being clear about defining the behavior that is expected of you when you're born.
Absolutely.
And what is not expected, so that it's not a gray area, the not expected. Clearly, when you are exploiting our people, you're not a Pan-Africanist. When you are killing our people, you're not a Pan-Africanist. When you're not uniting with other nations to build economy, to build power together, you're not a Pan-Africanist. So being clear about the description of the behavior that is expected for and against should be something else that we do. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just to sum that up, I'm just going to add this to it. In Africa today, we haven't got no Pan-African presidents at all, apart from 3 at the moment. So every other president that you see right now, they're not Pan-African, because
we
like
also have a question or two in the audience. So let me run by that as you do that. Make that comment.
Yeah. So they're basically they're not Pan-African, because like my brother said, in the work of their hands, you see exactly who they are, and everything they've done thus far is basically to be gatekeepers for the hegemonic powers.
Absolutely.
So Africans need to wake up to that. Okay, I'm just gonna sum. I've got a couple of questions there, my brother, man. This guy Adam S says, hello. Okay, let me just put it there so you can see it. He says, how does North Africa relate?
Yeah, and a predictable question. And I say that I'm one who readily accepts the complexities in the North Africa question. And I say that because for the most part, I understand the peopling of North Africa to self-identify as Arab. As far as that relates to the African identity, that is antagonist. That there is an antagonistic relationship there, and we need to be clear and unapologetic about stating that. Okay. Recently, there was a government minister, I believe it was in Tunisia, who came, who was advocating for the removal, the ejection of Africa. What he said were
African people,
right, from Tunisia. I think it was Tunisia.
It was Tunisia.
He said in so many words, they are going to bring their African identity to our their African culture to our country. You understand? So in the minds of these people, there's a clear distinction, yes, between the Arab identity and culture and the African identity and culture. And I am not into trying to seduce people and coax them and cajole them into an African identity, especially when they're not African. Okay, like that is foolishness, right? That said, I understand that there is complexity in terms of what is considered to be Arab, and then there are some who consider themselves to be Amazigh, but not Arab, although Arabized to some degree, who are trying to affirm their identity and their culture. Some within an African context, some not. You understand what I'm saying? Some we would look at and identify as readily African phenotypically, and some we probably wouldn't. You know what I'm saying? And there's complexity there.
And it's complicated.
Right. And I'm quite comfortable with accepting that and appreciating the fact that as a movement, we're gonna have to go through a process of addressing that complexity. Yes, especially because some of whom there is, even in that context, one thing that we should be clear of is that even in the context of who and what is Arab and Berber, Amazigh and whatever, there is a color stratification, right, within that sees the black at the bottom. You understand what I'm saying? We shouldn't be afraid to speak to and call out the Arabic supremacy and colonization of our people, the extent to which the Islamic religion has been used to demonize
preach, my brother, preach.
Indigenous African culture, spirituality. Yeah, we need to stand on our square where those subjects are concerned, and speak clearly about that fact. Our Baba Chinwezu, is a good person to study and read in relation to these issues. We should also be clear in that context about the political allegiances of the Arab quote unquote majority, depending on how you look on the issue, in North Africa. Even those who cite themselves as Pan-Africanists, unlike many, whilst I consider what America did to Muammar Gaddafi to have been criminal in its intent and its practice, I was never one who considered Gaddafi to be a stalwart Pan-Africanist. Another subject for another time.
Yep.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. But I was just not one of those people. So we need to be clear about those subjects whilst we're addressing the complexities. Yeah, in North Africa, I don't believe that people should be able to to reject African culture, African identity, and then adopt it when it's politically expedient.
Exactly.
Right, for them, in the name of a Pan-African power project. I'm not into that. Yeah. And so we have some challenges and some questions to address where it refers to North Africa.
But
Thank
also
you.
the importance in the language that we use and the words we use. When we use Mwana Ubuntu, we know what that means, and it's going to be stated clearly. So if our liberation is based on Wana Ubuntu, you don't have to worry about those who identify with whiteness. You don't. Or Arabness. Yeah, you don't.
I agree. I should also say another person to study on this is also Baba Kwesi Pra, who is a linguist, but because he's dealing with language, he's dealing with culture.
Yeah.
And he said that we should leave those who identify as Arab to identify as Arab. And yeah, you know what I'm saying? So yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, another quick one here. Oops, sorry. How do you address the psychology of religion? That's a big one. Do you want to go into that? That's a big one.
Yeah, I'll touch on it, especially within the context of Garveyism. It's one that causes a lot of debate as well, because of the fact that the majority of the movement was developed Christian expressions. Yeah, I should say. And many of them would self-identify as Christian. It would also be true to say that is a result of colonialism. But at the same time, in the Garvey movement itself refused to adopt a what's the word?
Yeah.
An individual religion. Yeah. So there were debates at conventions in terms of whether Africans should adopt like Islam as an official, and the UNIA should adopt Islam as an official religion because it was considered to be, it has a longer history, particularly in West Africa, than Christianity does, and so it was more embedded into the culture. Let's see, yeah. So but moving forward, I will say this. The UNIA was trying to develop an authentically African religious expression. Yes. And not everybody was going to discard their Christianity in order to do so. Not everybody was going to discard their Islam in order to do so. But as the movement developed, a greater appreciation for indigenous African spiritual systems developed among those who followed in the Garveyite tradition. And the affirmation of indigenous African spiritual systems followed as a result. I think the psychology of religion fundamentally needs to be addressed through the restoration of dignity and functionality to indigenous African spiritual systems. That we need to undo without apology the damage that has been done to indigenous African spiritual systems through Abrahamic propaganda. And we need to be unapologetic within that regard, giving due respect to our brothers and sisters who are Muslim and Christian, especially if you are Muslim and Christian and or adhering to the Hebrew faith, and you have an inclination towards working for your people. There are things that we can do together and so on, right? However, I am not going to be mealy mouth in terms of discussing the damage that has been done to our indigenous culture and spirituality as a result of adherence to these spiritual systems.
Thank you, ShakaRa.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
The best way to address it psychologically is to restore dignity and pride to our indigenous spiritual systems. And I'm saying this to especially for brothers and sisters who are so inclined that you want to affirm indigenous African spirituality. affirm indigenous African spirituality. You are not always going to do that to the best of our ability if we are preoccupied with attacking Abrahamic religions.
But just to add to what you're saying, ShakaRa, and I like that the Barry Stewart, thank you so much for basing it on psychology, because that is where the problem is. You cannot affirm African spirituality by being a Catholic. You cannot. You cannot affirm African spirituality by being a Muslim, because they're anti African spirituality.
My sister, there's a majority extent to which I agree with you. I am being kind to our brothers and sisters. Yeah. So I am.
I'm happy you're doing that. I'm not in the business of grace.
No. I get it. I get it, because I know there are our Muslim and Christian brothers and sisters who attempt to do just that. Yes. What I will say is that to whatever the extent of the success of their attempt, it will not be to the fullest extent.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I reserve the fullest extent of that affirmation to those of us who affirm indigenous African spiritual systems. I believe that there are extents to which our brothers and sisters, and historically this has been done, like if you look at ShakaRa, for example, he's a great advocate of our African culture, self-identified as a Muslim. I respect his attempt. I will argue that his attempt is hampered by his allegiance to what I would consider to be a foreign and oppressive religion, but I respect his attempt. Yeah, if you understand what I'm saying. The same for Bob. I'm forgetting his name.
Where?
No way. No, I was gonna say no. Well, yes, but no. But anti-colonial freedom fighter in Southeast Africa. Led the rebellion. I can't remember. He's a Christian leader. But I can't remember his name. But yeah, it's got my head.
Is that not Tutu? Is it? Is Desmond Tutu? No.
No.
Certainly not. No, certainly not. This is okay. But the point is, there are Africans. I try to be empathetic and respectful to Africans who have that inclination and want to do good for our people. Yeah. To respect their efforts, despite my own conviction in that regard. But I also affirm that there are limitations to those efforts based upon.
You're being politically correct on that one.
I embrace the empathy and the grace that you're giving them. But here goes my theory, and actually, here goes it. If we're truly seeking full liberation, and there's no other liberation, there's no medium, there's no a little bit liberation. If we're truly seeking full liberation, we have to confront that.
Absolutely.
Because we cannot operate. The systems themselves, those religion systems are based on white supremacy. That's why you have white Jesus in your houses, despite the fact that you all look black in those houses. And the other on Arabic superiority, because that's why they say you have to learn Arabic to be a Muslim, right? That's part of the requirement.
No, 100%.
In Arabic.
Let me say this as well, just to put maybe some more complexity on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Much of the, especially coming from an African diaspora perspective, but not exclusively, because this dynamic exists on the continent as well. Much of the way that we, as Africans in the Caribbean or throughout the Americas, really found African spirituality was through indigenous African spiritual retentions that carried the veil of Christianity, if that makes sense, right? And so one of the things that I've learned to do is, like, being in Sierra Leone, for example, you've got a significant number of Muslims and Christians in Freetown or in places that I've been to, yeah? Sometimes you're going to see an Islamic expression. When you look into it a bit deeper, you're going to see the indigenous culture and spirituality there, but it has the veil of Islam or Christianity. Does that make sense? So my experience teaches me to be patient about that reality, yeah, and to seek to understand how things evolve, and why they evolve, while standing on my square, yeah, of the affirmation of indigenous African spiritual systems as a prerequisite to our liberation. And as Papa, and bringing it back to the subject of Garveyism, this is our evolution of the thing, because he says in so many words that we must develop our institutions based upon our own spiritual and cultural idealisms, our own culture and idealisms, and that we must see the Creator through our own spectacles.
I love that. I love how you summed that up, ShakaRa. Okay, have you got what time for one more question, please?
Go ahead, my brother and my sister.
Okay.
As long as it's not logging out the show too much for you.
No. We're good.
Yes.
Okay, this is it. Hello. Has your guest worked with Dr. Julius Garvey or his new book called Justice for Marcus Garvey? Look for me in the whirlwind, and can he comment on him finally being pardoned? Thanks.
Oh yes. Okay. Two things. On Dr. Julius Garvey, I have not worked with him directly. He did send a message through somebody that we know mutually to me, because he has seen a presentation that I had done, and he wanted me to get in contact with him. I have not done so as yet, and I should have by now. So I will be doing so. So yeah, I have not read the book either. And you know, as Dr. Julius Garvey will know, as Garveyites, there are some critical contradictions that we find with our elder. We don't. I wouldn't disrespect him because of those things, but he wouldn't be aware of the fact that there are some critical contradictions that we find with our elder. Even as much as we would seek to show him due honor and respect as an elder in that regard. But just from a Garveyite perspective, there are some challenges that we have, and he's aware of these things. Yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to reach out to the elder. I will do so, and when we connect, we connect. Look for me in the. Sorry, let me make sure I got the rest of that question.
The pardon. Your comment on the pardon.
No, there was something about look for me in the whirlwind. Look for me in the whirlwind. Can you comment?
Book.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's
the book.
Yeah.
Right, that's the book. Okay. Yes, yeah. I'm yet to read the book. Having said that, the call for justice for Papa Garvey is an important one. But for me, the UNIA ACL RC 2020 is in the midst of a campaign entitled "We Exonerate Garvey." The most important thing for us to understand is that the exoneration of Papa Garvey is in the hands of us as African people. Ultimately, it's good politically. The pardon is good for political purposes, especially because the masses of our people are not organized on this program at the moment. It's a good political tool. But ultimately, a pardon or an exoneration in our enemy's institution, in the ultimate capacity, should mean very little to us.
Yeah, it don't mean nothing.
Yeah. What we should use it as a tool, what we should use it is a tool for exposing the extreme criminality of the Bakra and his systems of jurisprudence. That a man who was fighting for African liberation could not find justice in their system and was in fact criminally imprisoned and deported on trumped up charges. We should use the experience of Papa Garvey in terms of the American criminal injustice system as an example of that fact. And so I want to say that, though, whilst honoring the good and hard work of our sincere brothers and sisters who fought to get that pardon. A lot of work went into that. I do not want to disgrace or diminish the sacrifice of those brothers and sisters and or the family of Papa Garvey in achieving that. Again, it has its political value. I'm just saying, ultimately, the exoneration of Papa Garvey and the legacy and the name of the most honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey is in the hands of us as African people and not in the hands of the American government or the American criminal injustice system.
Thank you very much, my brother. Okay, finally, question from our last guest for you. This is what we normally do here. So we ask for a question from our last guest for you.
Oh, yeah, what was to ask you?
No, they got a question for you. And then once you answer that question, we need a question from you for our next guest.
Yes, I'm familiar with this. Yeah, go ahead. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
So how are you, as an African diaspora, participating in the upbuilding of Mama Africa? I know you're already doing that, but just
I was about to
say. Tell us. Yeah, you're already doing that anyway, based on everything you're doing. But just give an answer to it.
Yeah, so there's various ways, and when you're doing this work, you never feel like you're doing enough. And my goal is, I'm about to arrive at my 40th year around the sun, and my goal around the sun. Right. My goal for the next 10 is to really solidify and it's, my organizational efforts, yeah, throughout the African world. So one of the major things that I'm doing at the moment is the development of a media institution called Kimbunga Media. And we aim to do many things, but just develop a viable Pan-African, Black nationalist, Pan-Africanist, universal African nationalist media platform that can inform and politically educate our people. We are not now what we want to be, where we want to go. We're just developing that through progressive stages. And I have said, and I will say again, one of the major projects at the moment is to complete the production of the Ujamaa Black Group Economic Series. Yeah. Where we're going to be engaging in economic education beyond financial literacy and business development. Yeah, that we're gonna. So that's the aim of that particular show. At the moment, however, we are doing work just in terms of shining a light on the plight of African people all around the world. So as we know, Congo is a major issue at the moment. Our last show was about Kenya. We spoke to a brother from Kenya, our brother William Sakawa, who is a journalist or was a journalist on
African
African
stream,
yeah.
yeah.
And so our next session coming up on Wednesday, Ujama Day, Wednesday, the 16th, we'll be speaking to our brother Kambale Musavuli, who is a brother from Congo, who is currently residing in Ghana, and we're going to be discussing the situation in Congo, particularly as it pertains to this stupid
the stupid deal.
Yeah, right. That they said them said them time. So we're going to be asking the question, brothers and sisters: Has President Donald Trump brought peace to Congo and Rwanda? And our brother Kambale Musavuli is going to assist us.
Was he a part of causing the unrest?
Indeed. You know, that is the question. But yeah, so astute brothers and sisters will note that the tongue-in-cheek nature of the question. But it is what it is. So yeah, that's one thing. Through our work with the UNIA, ACL, and the Black Star Action Network International. So the Black Star Action Network International in particular has a program that is called Tools and Seeds, whereby we partner with indigenous people groups, particularly in Sierra Leone. But it's a model that we would like to replicate. But to basically, so one of the realities that we have to deal with as a people is the commandeering of our agricultural industries and the suppression of indigenous agricultural industry, so to speak. Yeah. And the extent to which that affects our food sovereignty as a people. So just as one example, you have companies like Monsanto and others who copyright seeds.
Yeah.
GMO.
Oh, look, you're smiling.
Right? And then create circumstances in which organic seeds are non-viable on the economic market. Yeah.
Kenya is the poster child for that.
Right. Yeah. And this dispossesses and disempowers indigenous communities on the ground. Yeah. And so one of the ways that we try to address this is that sometimes it's difficult for our people to come by the seeds and the tools that we need to be able to produce agriculturally. So the program aims to, but what we do often tend to have is land, access to land, indigenous people groups. So if we partner with the indigenous people groups and are able to contribute resources to an agricultural program that provides the resources to the community to be able to work the land, and then to be able to hopefully create a market for the produce throughout the nation to begin with, and then throughout the African diaspora. As things develop, so there'll be a market, for example, for groundnut, from Sierra Leone in Jamaica, wherever it is, think that's as an example. But the point is to empower the community as we empower ourselves as a people. So there's that program. You can find it out by checking out basani.org, BSANI.org. There is also the Be Clean campaign, which I've contributed to as well, financially as well. We haven't been able to host it in London. We're supposed to host it around the world. Well, we haven't been able to host it, but we contribute to it being hosted throughout different countries and cities on the African continent. And this is literally going into a community and engaging in a cleanup process. This began after the flooding, the mudslide, that happened in Sierra Leone some years ago, and our leadership, Chief Fode, Sister Kenya, went into the market area just engaging in a cleanup. So periodically, the community is galvanized around going into a community space and it's engaging in a cleanup. We will know that in most of our nations, national waste disposal is not a thing that exists. Yeah. And so this creates all kinds of ecological health issues. Yeah. And so in a small way, we try to impact that by engaging our communities in periodical cleanups. And so we contribute that, we raise money for that. And so there are other things that I'm contributing. The Pan-African Library of the Gambia is an institution that I support. I've recently connected with our sister Enemesit Richards, who is the co-founder and director of the Thomas Sankara Institute that currently operates in Burkina Faso and Niger. Yeah, so promoting institutions such as those and supporting institutions such as those are ways in which we assist our people on the continent. But I also want to say that the race first ideology means that we need to be working among African people wherever we are. So we're not sitting on our laurels until we get to the continent. Yeah. You know,
I agree. I agree.
You know, if we're in the UK, especially if we're in a situation whereby Africans are a majority, so that would relate to the majority of the Caribbean. There's a lot of work to be done among our people everywhere. So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that, my brother. Can you give us? Yeah, go on.
Quickly though, because apparently, brother, you're speaking a language that cannot be understood. Apparently, that's what's happening. ShakaRa is not talking about capitalism. ShakaRa is talking about food security. ShakaRa is talking about us preserving our indigenous seeds and sharing them with farmers all over the continent so that we can get food security. That's what he's talking about. We're not worried about competing with Monsanto and SAT. We want to destroy them. We want to take them out of our continent.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're dealing with a revolutionary economic policy here. And that revolutionary economic policy will have stages, right? You know what I'm saying? So we're obviously we haven't amassed the power to kick out Monsanto right now. You know what I'm saying? But what we can do is in some small ways help to empower our indigenous communities, you know, in whatever ways that we can. And then we'll grow that power, you know, as we go forward. So yeah, I don't like I said, there are many people who are allegiant to Bakra economic systems, nation states, and so on.
Absolutely.
And so they will attempt to cast aspersions on what we're trying to do, mischaracterize it, them kind of things. That's the stuff that we have to deal with. And by the way, brother, that first A in Basani is not required. So it's Black Star Action Network International. So it's BSANI. Yeah, BSA. BSANI.
Okay. I'll do that again.
All right.
Yeah. Can you leave a question for our next guest, please, my brother?
Do I have to leave?
What would you like to ask? Yeah, what would you like to ask our next guest? Yeah, it's customary.
Am I leaving the question without knowledge of who the guest is?
You don't. Yeah, no, but yeah, you don't know who's coming.
Oh. What? Give an example of an indigenous African institution that can be evolved to suit our needs in contemporary times.
Can you repeat that, please?
Can you provide an example of an indigenous African institution that can be evolved to suit our needs in modern times?
Well, that's going to be an interesting one. Brilliant. Yeah, brilliant.
Can I spoil it for the guest who comes next and give?
I would love for you to answer that. But the guest will answer that.
Mbongi.
Okay. Yeah. Mbongi. All right. I understand.
Okay, my brother, can you just let our people know how do they contact you, your social media handles, everything? Just share for us with this, please. How can they, if they want to link up with you, if they want to, obviously, Kim, go on.
Quickly, because I noticed something, and thanks to Nwari for pointing that out. Do you want to rephrase that and take out the word indigenous because it's co-opted right now by the movements that are moving away from African, or you're good with it?
I think I said indigenous African, right?
Yes.
Yes,
okay.
Specific with that.
How can we specify that, or are we good with it?
I'm good with it for now.
Okay.
Maybe I need more clarity on what it is that you're referring to.
And then you can have a session on Kimbunga and talk about it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yeah, to find me, ShakaRa speaks on anything, Kimbunga Media on anything. Yeah. So ShakaRa speaks on anything, Kimbunga Media on anything. I look forward to your sign-ups, your comments, your questions, just the interaction, and your financial contributions if you are so moved.
and support, subscribe, because Kimbunga by itself is not fighting the system. Kumbukeni by itself is not fighting the system. The Imagine Alkebulan by itself is not fighting the system. As we saw with African Stream, if we stand alone, it's easier to take us down. But if we stand together and we grow as a group of multiple African Wana Ubuntu media platforms, we are stronger and more powerful, as Marcus Garvey taught us. Thank you.
Absolutely. I just want to end by thanking you both again, for the invitation. It is really an honor. I truly do value the work that you all are doing. It was an honor, my brother, to meet you, Oladele, with the Baba Maponga event. Yeah, it's an honor to meet you both there, and my sister Nduka. I look forward to meeting you. I did declare my absolute love for you to our brothers when I met them. You know what I'm saying? So just keep doing what you're doing, and no doubt if you're still there if you're still there when I come to New York, I'm gonna make sure I hit you up.
No, we're gonna get you all here. Yeah. We are gonna get you all here.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for watching and being part of the community. And this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you, my brother ShakaRa. You have been immensely knowledgeable. The wisdom you shared is just, I sat down there, my brother, man, and you kept me quiet today. This
is true. That is an achievement. That is a huge.
I assure you, sis, I wasn't trying to keep you quiet. I love when you talk.
No, but I didn't need to speak because you said everything I would say.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.